Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, on behalf of the Gyepes family, I'd like to thank you all for gathering at Hillside Memorial Park today for the funeral service of Michael Gyepes. As the service is about to begin, if everyone can take the opportunity to place their cell phones in either an off or a silenced mode, it would be greatly appreciated. Officiating Michael's service today is Rabbi Stephen Carr Rubin and Cantor Chaim Frankel.
Adonai Madam Vatedaehu Ben Enosh Vatechashevehu Adam Lahevel Dama Yamav Kitzelo Bover Baboker Yatzitz V'chalav La'erev Yimolel V'yavesh Limenot Yameinu Kein Hoda v'novil v'chochmo Shmartam ure'ei yashar Ki acharit leish shalom Ach Elohim yifde nafshi miyad she'ol Ki yikacheni selah Pode Adonai Nefesh avada Velo yeshmu kol Achosim bo
Adonai Ma'adam V'Tedaehu, Cantor Frankel chants from our tradition. Ancient words connect us from one generation to the next. A prayer, a kind of cry of the heart, a recognition that this is the human experience. Gathering together, saying formal farewell to someone we love, reaching for words that never really come, reaching for words that can never truly capture a life, the trials and the tribulations and the triumphs and the successes of what life represents, the relationships, the complexity of all that we are and all that we do and all that we give, and the lives that we touch and the people we love, as if we could somehow wrap it up in a package and say, here it is, here's Michael's life. But the truth is so different from that. Every life tells a story, but the story is unique and individual to every single one of you. Michael's life wasn't just Michael's life. It was all of our lives. It was every way we interacted with him, every conversation, every memory, every experience. That's his life, like the pebble in the pond that sends ripples. The things that he did, his accomplishments, his talents, his abilities, his children, his grandchildren, all of that. There's no way to capture that in a few moments, in a few sentences, no matter how carefully crafted. Even if we had every single one of you stand up and share your memories, which I promise you I'm not going to do. But even if we did, you wouldn't capture him. Each of you has your own very personal and very private experience of who Michael Gyepes was and continues to be for you in your lives. And nothing, not even death, can ever take that away. Adam Yisodome afar v'sofo afar. The human being whose body is formed from the dust of the earth returns, kacheres hanishbar, like a broken vessel, kachatzir yavesh, like the grass that is withered, chutzitz novella, and like a blossom that has faded, che'avak poreach, and like dust that is scattered in the wind, v'hachalom yaufen, like a dream that slips from our consciousness and beyond our grasp. Give sorrow words, said Shakespeare. The grief that does not speak whispers the o'erfought heart and bids it break. Give sorrow words. And indeed, that too is why we are here today, to give sorrow words, to share some stories from family and a few close friends about Michael, to stir our own memories, those of us privileged to know him and have him be a part of our lives in all the different ways that he was, and to carry those memories. And the more we share stories, and I encourage you after to share stories about Michael with each other, particularly with his children and grandchildren, the more we do that, the richer that memory and those memories become, the more precious they are, the gifts, the jewels that we pass to each other. And though, as I said a moment ago, I know there's no way to truly capture his life in these words, still words there must be. And so it's my privilege first to invite Lee Rogers, a colleague of Michael's, to come and share some thoughts with us.
Good morning, everybody. 6 years ago, when Edna lay dying, she reached over and grabbed my hand and said, I would like you to talk at my funeral, she said. And I said I would be honored. And then her hand reached under the covers and she pulled out a piece of paper. And she said, this is what I want you to read. Well, I didn't have that advantage today, so I had to sit and write something, and I'm doing the best I can. Michael and I first met in June of 1959. We were both about to start a rotating internship at Mount Zion Hospital in San Francisco. From the first, Michael was intriguing to me. I had never met a Hungarian refugee before. You might say he was fresh off the boat. He arrived on these shores having escaped the repressed Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Michael had an accent that made social intercourse for anyone who wasn't a Professor Henry Higgins, to say the least, difficult. But when I listened in carefully, it wasn't just the accent that made communication difficult. He was literally using English words that I was not familiar with. In short, I realized that to be Michael's friend, I had to stretch my IQ, and I still had to up until 10 days ago because he was such a bright man. His intellectual expertise, by the way, was not limited to radiology. Michael wrote and published 4 novels. I don't know whether everybody knows all these things about him, but I'm going to go through them quickly. He translated Hungarian plays into English. And above all, he was always available to solve all of the world's problems. Of my friends, Michael probably came closest to being the universal man. During our internship, we became good friends. Michael was the only person now living in Los Angeles, or up until last week, who attended Gail's and my wedding in March of 1960. I treasure those images. I became used to the fact that Michael always one-upped me, and there was no going away. There was no getting around it. I remember climbing up the stairs to the interns' quarters in November of 1959. I had a particularly wonderful evening with my future wife, Gail, and I ran into Michael on the stairs, and in a very excited manner, I told him that we had just become engaged. Michael said, that's nothing. He said, I just got married today. So, so we went, and that's how our relationship was. He always one-upped me. The following decade found us training on different coasts. And when Michael returned, to the left coast, we renewed our friendship. Even the 45-minute trip from Pacific Palisades to Encino was navigable. In the last 10 years, we started meeting as the Romeos. For those of you who don't know what the Romeos are, it stands for Retired Old Men Eating Out. It's not original, but it was a lot of fun. The other two Romeos were Grant Proper and Zenon Newmark, both of whom are here today. We met every 4 to 6 weeks for lunch, and again, we tried to solve all the world's problems. I am not certain that Romeo will survive without Mike. He was our glue, our elder statesman, although he was not the eldest. Michael was 84, which you might call a ripe old age. Nevertheless, his death was untimely. He had so much more to give. I will miss Michael. We'll all miss Michael. Thank you.
I'd also like to invite Aaron Paul to come, one of his oldest friends.
On behalf of my family, Eva and my 5 children, who the 3 oldest were very, very close to Edna and Mike and the children, we want to express our sincerest condolences to all of the family, to the children, to the grandchildren. I personally feel very honored that David asked me to speak today. And Eva and I, as Lee did, sat down and tried to recall our memories. Eva and I met Michael and Edna 60 years ago. At that time, Michael was still in medical school at UCSF. Eva and Edna, Eva my wife and Edna, were personal friends from B'nai B'rith days. Edna met me and said, I think you would enjoy meeting a man I'm dating, Michael. That was in 1958. And Michael and I hit it off immediately. He invited me to a medical fraternity party at UCSF. When I showed up without a necktie, Michael said, oh, no, you must have a tie. So he invited me back to his room at the dormitory for the male medical students. And on the way, there was a window. And he took me to the window and he said, you see that building next door to us? That's where the women medical students and nursing students live. And he said, "You see that window? Well, the window has been put in backwards. It's the women's shower room. And whenever the light goes on, all of the men in the dormitory run down to look to see who's taking a shower." Eve and I were at the Edna and Michael's wedding on October 31, 1959. By that time, I had started law school. I had no money. I had a junky old car that somehow made it up with Michael and Edna sitting in the back seat to Lake Tahoe. I remember none of us had any money. There was a particular restaurant where you could get a very, very cheap meal with prime rib. Michael thought it was wonderful. We ended up eating every dinner while we were there for 1 week, having prime rib. On the way back, we somehow managed to get back to San Francisco to the Richmond district. And about 3 blocks before Michael and Edna's apartment, the front tire went flat. We jumped out of the car and looked. There was a hole that had been worn through. There were no treads in the tire. You could stick your finger from the outside all the way through to the inner tube. Somehow, we managed to make it. We were at their wedding on October 31, 1959, and afterwards, we were inseparable. During all the time that they were in the San Francisco area, many, many weekends we spent together. This was before there were children or grandchildren. We took a wonderful trip to South America, to their mammoth mountain home. There was always hospitality in their beautiful home in Pacific Palisades. For weddings, special events, birthdays, we would come down. While Michael was an intern, he was stationed in a hospital in Brooklyn. We went back east to be together. Michael was on duty in the emergency room as the radiologist. He put a white jacket on me, a white doctor's coat, and said, "Follow me, but don't say a word." And he took me on his rounds, including going to the radiology lab, where there was a room with lights so that they could put the negatives up to show the brain injuries of children. And I remember how impressed I was when Michael would point to a little squiggle and he'd say, "See that line? That's not supposed to be there. That's an indication of an injury or malfunction." I was so impressed. We also spent every summer that I can recall, when the children were young, at Lair the Bear, which is the University of California camp up in the Sierra Mountains. They were wonderful, wonderful memories. Our children and the Gyepes children were inseparable. They went everywhere together. Now, Michael had a jacket, he called it his dinner jacket, that he would wear to every meal in the camp. It was a silver material. One sleeve was completely black because Stephen wouldn't use a napkin. He would wipe his face on Michael's jacket. So Michael called it his dinner jacket. There was one occasion where my youngest child at the time, Suzanne, was sitting across from Michael at the camp dining room and choked on a piece of meat and was choking. Michael simply sat up, pulled her chin down, popped his finger into the back of her throat, pushed the meat down all was well, except Suzanne was terrified of Michael afterwards. Our children became very, very good friends. We would take ski trips together. And I remember there was one particular ski trip where when I went up to pay the bill, they gave me a bill that showed that Stephen and my daughter Jessica, after we had gone to bed, had somehow gone to the bar and ordered multiple strawberry daiquiris. They were about 14 or 15 years old. At Mike's 70th birthday, Edna called us and said, Aaron, I would like you to bring your French horn, I'm a musician as a hobby, down and play the Hungarian Rhapsody for Michael at the party. So I did, and Michael at the party said, gee, I haven't heard the Hungarian Rhapsody since I entered the country as a refugee in 1957. And I remember there was some band down on the platform as the plane came in playing the Hungarian Rhapsody, and I thought, these crazy Americans, we've been traveling for 20 hours. We're tired, we're hungry. All I want is a meal and go to bed. And they're giving us a concert? All of a sudden, I realized. I said, Michael, there was a band when you landed? He said, yes, it was the Andrews Air Force Base. Well, the Andrews Air Force Base is across the road from Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I was a soldier. They took me out of basic training, and we were supposed to go to Korea, and they were going to put us in advanced infantry. But then they pulled me out of advanced infantry and said, oh, no. We need musicians, and we're building up our bands. You're going to play French horn in the band. So they put me into a band training unit to learn military routines. While we were there, they told us there are plane loads of Hungarian refugees landing, and we're going to greet them by playing the Hungarian Rhapsody. And so I recall the planes would come in, we would play, the refugees, ragtag looking, coming off, and another plane would come in. We were out there on the tarmac with those planes for hours. And at that party at Michael's house for his 70th, he and I realized that that's where we met the first time. And in all the 70 years we've been friends, we had never put that together. I had been sent from Fort Dix to California to play in the 6th Army Band at the Presidio as a soldier, and that's where I was when Michael and I started seeing each other. After Edna's death, Michael went through a very, very difficult time. David asked me to come down and spend some time with Michael, and I did that alone, he and I. And we talked, and I stayed overnight at the house, and I felt very, very glad that I had come because I felt I had lifted his spirits. And he said so as well. Mike's last visit was this October. He came up to San Francisco. Eve and I arranged a lovely lunch at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Then we took him to the Legion of Honor, where there was an art display of very, very well-known Austrian artists. He enjoyed that. And then the highlight of the trip, it turns out, was we took him to visit the old haunts. We drove out to where he and Edna had their first apartment. We showed him where we had lived, which was very close. Our apartment was a few blocks away from Edna's parents. Mike is my oldest friend. And I have 60 years of wonderful memories with him that I'll never forget. I'll never forget his charm, his humor, his jokes, his intelligence, his world outlook, his knowledge. I read 2 of his books. I knew he was highly regarded in the medical community. He was a wonderful joke teller. He could tell the most intricate jokes. I don't know how he could remember them. They would go on and on and on, and they would end in a smash that you couldn't stop laughing. There was a trip that we took to Mammoth, a ski lodge, and we were in the gondola. All of us. He was telling a joke. We were laughing so hard that the gondola started to sway. I remember, if particularly Stephen and David, if you can remember his famous joke called the Crunchberg joke, I wouldn't begin to tell it. But because it was so intricate, but it was funny. He had this natural gift as a stand-up comic. I'm privileged that I had this opportunity to speak a few words to a man that I will miss, just as we missed Edna. Thank you very much.
The inevitability of death makes it none less tragic or painful for those whose lives have been shaken and left behind. Especially for, of course, his precious and beloved immediate family, his children, David and Stephen and Nancy, although Stephen may not want to get up after all of that. But hearing from them is really the greatest gift and the greatest tribute that we can pay. So I'd like to ask David if you would come and share a few thoughts with us.
So thank you all for coming today. I'm an ugly crier, so I give you full rights and permission to look away. So Mike, my father, died in his home of natural causes on December 18th, 2017. As a person, he was confident but humble, decent, funny, playful, a bit irreverent and intellectually curious. He was an easy guy to like, and I liked him an awful lot. Mike was born in Budapest, Hungary, to a middle-class Jewish family, the oldest child of Laszlo and Elizabeth. His early years were spent in Budapest on his grandfather's farm in the Hungarian countryside, where he loved spending time riding horses, exploring and playing. By all accounts, until the age of 10, he lived a safe, full, and happy life. In early 1944, the German army invaded Hungary and began deporting Jews to ghettos and concentration camps. Seeking safety, Mike's mother left Budapest and took Mike and his sister to the family farm, where she learned from a local constable that she had made a terrible mistake. He told her to turn around and return to Budapest as quickly as possible, which she did. And a couple of weeks later, all the Jews in the area were sent to concentration camps and liquidated. Upon returning to Budapest, Mike's parents were dispossessed of their home, and they were forced into the Jewish ghetto. My grandparents scrambled, trying to save their children. A group of Catholic nuns agreed to hide 10-year-old Mike from the Nazis. He was baptized and converted to Catholicism. If the Nazis asked if any Jewish children were in hiding, the nuns could honestly say no. And this was important because Amazingly, on the other side of the wall from the convent was the Hungarian Gestapo headquarters. My father stayed with these incredibly courageous and righteous women until the war's end. He describes a sense of utter joy at the end of the fighting. No more extended periods in bomb shelters, no more bombings, and eventually he actually had enough food to eat. He and his immediate family had all luckily survived. Mike recommenced a more normal life in now communist Hungary, going to school, playing sports, friendships, etc. However, he was quite mischievous and misbehaved enough to get kicked out of and banned from many of Budapest's swimming facilities and spas. As many of you probably realize, some of these traits were passed down to the next generation. Mike loved literature, and he figured he would pursue a career in the humanities. His senior year in high school, he won a nationwide literary essay contest. As a reward, the Hungarian Communist Party determined that a young man with such talents should be shipped off to the premier communist university in Moscow. Again, Mike and the family scrambled. This was not a fate that they endorsed or wanted. And in an effort to avoid going to Moscow, he applied to medical school and somehow gained acceptance. By all accounts, he enjoyed medical school and life in Budapest as a young man, but in 1956, the Soviet army invaded Hungary, and Mike left the country on short notice, becoming a political refugee in Vienna. At the age of 23, he ended up here in Los Angeles. The next year, he moved to San Francisco to continue his medical studies or recommence them. There, he met Edna and made many close, long-lasting friends. You've heard from some of them. There are others here. Actually, the people that Mike escaped from Hungary with are here too, Vera and Zebi Karakesh. So San Francisco was great for Mike. He finally found what he had been longing for, which was a good cup of espresso in the cafes of North Beach. He completed his internship and residency in pediatric radiology on the East Coast, and at the time, he also enlisted in the U.S. Army. He was an officer in the medical corps, and he described his fellow young physicians in New York as a group of mostly Jewish, Italian, and Irish smartasses who kept him laughing and made it difficult on their commanding officers. Mike then commenced a career in academic medicine at UCLA. He became a full professor and the chief of pediatric radiology. In 1978, he moved into private practice at Long Beach Memorial Hospital, and after he retired, he worked part-time at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles until the age of 78. Subsequent to his retirement, he returned to his first love, authoring 4 historical novels under the pseudonym Michael T.G. Gyepes. You can find them online. In 2011, after 52 years of marriage, Edna passed away, and apart from the loss of his wife, Mike lost his business manager. Edna handled everything, all the finances. I do not think that Mike knew what a checkbook register was. I don't actually think that he knew how much money he made. And so he engaged in a crash course, and it was amazing to see a guy his age develop financial literacy. In the last years of his life, Mike actively participated in the Plato Society of Los Angeles. He lectured at the Los Angeles Holocaust Museum, and his testimony about his World War II experience is archived in Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. During the last year of his life, he had the opportunity to visit many dear friends in the Bay Area. He traveled to his native Hungary with all of his children and grandchildren, where he spent time with our Hungarian family. Just 2 days prior to his passing, Papa Mike proudly attended his granddaughter Emily's bat mitzvah. He loved his grandchildren dearly. So for me, my father was a decent and good man. His trials and tribulations didn't close him down. Instead, he really opened his arms to the world. He had a deep sense of acceptance and tolerance towards others. To Mike, we were all part of the same group, the human tribe. He looked at people in the best American sense for who they were as individuals, not their ethnic, religious, or national affiliations. Even regarding Germany, he would say a great country with a great history and culture where something went terribly, psychotically wrong. For me, Mike was the right father. He met me where I was, which I suspect at times wasn't easy. I felt supported by him and never judged for my nonlinear professional path. We could discuss most anything, including death and afterlife. He took comfort in the unknowable mysteries and questions of life and the universe. I was deeply honored to care for him as he became older, and so appreciate my lovely wife Shirley's care and love towards Mike. Little made me happier than walking into the house after work on Monday evenings and seeing him sitting at our kitchen counter talking to Shirley, mostly him talking to her, about a book, medicine, the kids, history, politics, whatever. I was blessed to have Mike as my father, and I will miss him greatly. I'll leave you with some words from Desiderata, which is a writing that Mike liked so much, he kept a framed version in his home. I think this captures some of the way he thought about things. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly and listen to others. Even the dull and the ignorant, they too have their stories. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars, and you have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful, strive to be happy.
Stephen? What's picking you up today?
It's pretty appropriate. I've already been called out twice in the service. I'd like to get through this as my brother did, which is always a tough act to follow, so forgive me if I'm not looking up. The last meaningful conversation I had with Mike was Sunday night at my niece's bat mitzvah. We were at UCLA Faculty Center, a place that holds special meaning for us. We have had several significant family events there. We were looking at a picture of Mike with all of his grandchildren in front of his childhood apartment in Budapest, and we were talking about how great our trip was this past summer and how things really have come full circle. My dad was so happy and told me how important and special it was to have us all there together. Little did I know that Mike's life was literally about to be a completed full circle. The shape of Mike's life might have been twisted and unpredictable, but ultimately the circle was perfectly completed. I called Mike Sunday night just to debrief about the weekend and tell him a completely inappropriate joke. Some of you have already heard the joke. Monday morning, I went to work and then I received a call from my brother informing me that Mike had passed sometime Monday morning. It brings me some comfort to know that Mike passed exactly as he wanted, at the house, in his own bed, the same way his father passed many years ago. I recall driving with one of my father's dear friends, Steve Bernstein. We were going to check on the status of his home after a major fire threatened the Palisades Highlands. Of course, I knew a fire road that connected the Highlands to Bienvenida, and at the time it was the only way to get to his home, as the fire department had blocked off Palisades Drive. As we drove across the gravel and dirt road in his Mercedes, we began to discuss my father. "You know your father is brilliant," he said. And I answered, "Yeah, I know," in a somewhat blasé tone. Steve slammed on the brakes, looked at me directly in the eye and said, "No, really, your father is a brilliant man." Growing up in our house was always challenging. My older brother had always excelled in intellectual pursuits, much like my father, and I always excelled at everything else, basically screwing around, causing trouble, and driving my mom crazy. When my parents had friends over for dinner, it was like the United Nations. I remember them always being nice to me, but at times it was uncomfortable. The conversations at the dinner table were generally about politics, history, art, language, classical music, theater, and the state of the world. While somewhat interested, I truly had no understanding of the subjects. I remember I couldn't wait to be excused so I could go screw around. It was not until I was much older that I began to appreciate those settings. When I think back about the people who were the usual suspects, the Birnbaums, the Zatziks, the Alkalis, the Steckles, the Bernsteins, the Gilsons, the Rogers, and the Northern Cal contingent of the Karakushes, the Babiers, the Lagerquists, the Cohns, the Gahlers, and the Pauls, it was easy to see why these evenings would go on and the conversation would last late into the evening. All of these people were learned scholars in their fields and truly brilliant themselves. They were vibrant and passionate about life and what it had to offer. As time went on, I began to develop a unique relationship with my father. We began our connection with a passion for good soccer, not just any soccer, but truly the highest level of international competition. While living in England for a year, I was exposed to the sport that fast became my favorite. My father understood the game so much better than I realized. And as I became a student of the game, as a player, and later as a fan, we had many conversations about the subtleties, beauties, and brilliance of the game. The time we spent together in England was special. Riding horses in the Cotswolds and going to soccer matches with my father was a magical time in my life. We both saw the game in a manner that the casual fan just couldn't understand. My father loved the game and was always very proud of the Hungarian success in the sport, especially when they defeated England in Wembley Stadium in 1954, the first loss ever for England in that stadium. Hungary went on that year to the finals of the World Cup, losing to West Germany 3-2. One of my fondest memories in college, while I was a player, was looking over to the sidelines during a game and seeing my father. It was pouring rain, and there was my dad in a London fog raincoat and umbrella. It was one of only 2 games that my father was able to attend, and I was so happy that we got to share the experience. In addition to the time we spent together in England, I remember the summer trips our family would take to the Lair of the Bear and our numerous trips to Mammoth. These experiences left a lasting impression on me, and I truly cherish the times with my dad. My father always treated everyone well and with respect. My friends and other people who would meet him would comment about how polite and cordial and decent he was. My father never passed judgment on others, at least outwardly. He could hold a conversation with anyone and find some commonality with whomever he was engaged with. Just like with soccer and water polo, another sport he loved, there was so much more going on under the surface with my father, and I'd like to believe he felt that way about me. All he ever wanted for his children was to be happy and self-reliant, and our relationship evolved as I became older. After his heart attack and later the untimely death of my mother, Mike and I had numerous conversations regarding the subject of depression. In between those 2 events, my father's closest friends began to pass away, especially Jack Alkali, Henrik Birnbaum, and Stephen Bernstein. I would talk to my father about managing the emotional turmoil, generally out of concern for him, but the experience helped me to become more emotionally strong and to appreciate the good things in life: friends, family, health, the simple things in life. I finally realized that's what my father was all about: enjoying food, wine, coffee, jokes, family, stories, music, art, history, travel, a good nap, and laughing with friends. I have to thank my father's friend Klappa for all of his jokes and for bringing my father so much joy in his later years. All of these people I've mentioned realized how fortunate they were, especially those who came from extremely difficult circumstances and places in the world that were fraught with war and inhumanity. My father and mother worked tirelessly and provided a wonderful life for my brother, sister, and me, filled with opportunities, education, and travel. Not only are we blessed personally, but because of our parents, we're able to share our good fortune with our spouses, friends, and our own children. I know Mike wouldn't want me getting emotional while reading this. He always thought I was too emotional. Mike was never the same after Edna passed away. But the past year and a half have been tremendous, and Mike had a good run at the end. He got to travel, he got to see friends, and I just want to acknowledge a few people in particular who made the last year of Mike's life so good. Dr. Paul Benson, who met my father at a critical time and figured out how to psychologically, physiologically get him right. I can't thank you enough for what you did for our family. And Patty Roman, an angel on earth who came into our family and provided all the comfort and assistance that Mike needed at home. Compassionate and extremely capable, Patty quickly became a confidant, caregiver, and a friend to Mike, which is exactly what he needed at this time in his life. Patty brought our whole family peace of mind, and for that I will always be eternally indebted. And finally, my sister-in-law, Shirley, for always treating Mike to home-cooked meals every week and for treating him as she did her own father. My father came from a generation that worked tirelessly to achieve and shared with their children the importance of hard, consistent work. But just as important, my father taught me about perseverance, not by his words, but rather his actions. Surviving the Holocaust as a child, and then the Russian invasion of Hungary, are experiences that I can only describe to my children. But in time, I hope, too, they can understand just what my father endured in order to make all of our lives so good. My father taught me about the things in life that really need to be taken seriously, the simple joys of life that lie just beneath the surface, a brilliant yet simple concept that many of us grapple with. My father persevered through adversity in his life and was rewarded with everything a man could ask for: a successful and fulfilling career, a 52-year marriage that I'm sure would have been 58 had my mother not passed, and children and grandchildren who loved him unconditionally. He was able to pursue his passions and live comfortably. I don't know what else a man could ask for. Thanks for everything, Dad. I love you and will miss you more than my words can express. I now stand on the shoulders of a brilliant and compassionate man for whom I'm eternally grateful for making me a part of his amazing circle of life.
And finally, Nancy.
I always go last, and I hate having to follow Stephen. I don't know if I'm going to look up much either. We've heard many endearing stories and memories of our father. He was a wonderful, kind, generous man, as frequently the case with siblings. We each had a different relationship with our father. By the time I came around, my parents were a little bit more seasoned, and I was a girl. The relationship I had with my father was complex. I was never his, quote, little girl, but more of a very small adult that he was objectively curious about. I didn't receive the classic princess treatment for being the only and youngest female child, but rather he wanted me to be able to take care of myself and therefore pushed me to be independent. This is not to say that we didn't have special moments in our relationship. As a child, he frequently took me on, I'm sorry, I just lost my place. He frequently took me on bike rides to the Brentwood Mart or along the then new bike path at the beach. We would spend rainy Sunday afternoons listening to classical music in front of the fireplace in the living room. He also taught me the art of drinking a good cup of coffee. Not the Starbucks type of coffee, but the real deal he had imported to use in his special collection of espresso machines. But I think my father and I connected the most as I became an adult and started studying psychology. He would always inquire as to what theorist I was studying, and he loved when I would analyze his dreams. As I got older, I realized that my father was a pretty interesting guy, and I loved bringing friends and others over to the house for meals and conversation. Frequently, this led to unusual characters showing up for Thanksgiving or Passover meals, much to my mother's dismay. As some of you know, my oldest daughter, Emily, was recently bat mitzvahed, and we were lucky enough to have my father present. I bring this up not only because of how special those memories are, but because I am struck by the similarities between the blessing my husband and I wrote for our daughter and the quote theme of my father's life. In our words to our daughter, we spoke about perseverance, her ability to face adversity head on and come out the other side. As I think about my father, I realize what a strong, persevering man he was. He persevered through the Nazi occupation of his home country at a very young age. He persevered through a revolution and an escape from communism. He left his family, his medical school training, and country, came to a new land not knowing the language, and managed to re-enroll in medical school with almost no time lost. I am in awe that my father's experiences did not make him bitter, angry, or judgmental. In fact, these experiences made him more accepting of how others, including his children and his grandchildren, chose to live their lives. My father was always willing to help people, especially with medical situations. He had no problem consulting with me about a friend's medical concern. If any of his children ended up in the hospital, which occurred a fair amount, he was there. This continued with his grandchildren. When my younger daughter was born, she had a serious heart condition. I remember the pediatric cardiologist coming into my hospital room trying to explain the condition to me while I was on pain medication after having had a C-section. I stopped the doctor and told him that I needed him to call my father, who was a pediatric radiologist. The doctor asked my father's name, and when I told him Dr. Michael Gyepes, he stared at me and said, "He was one of my favorite teachers. Of course I will call him." My father was very involved with my daughter's care and had numerous conversations with her cardiologist. One night, Gabriella developed a dangerously high fever, and I had to take her to St. John's ER. My father met me at the hospital. I was pretty hysterical, and the hospital at this time did not have a pediatric unit. The nurses were struggling to get an IV started on her. She was screaming, and I was crying. My father calmly walked over to the nurses as they were trying to find someone who could insert an IV into her tiny veins, and he told the nurses that he would do it. He assured them that he was in fact a physician and that he was more than capable of doing the job. They were so relieved that they allowed him to do the procedure. As you have heard, my father was a Renaissance man. He loved and knew an incredible amount about history, music, art, and religion. He was a writer and a fan of movies. He loved a good joke and loved to prank his family and friends. He was a man who could appreciate a wonderful meal with friends and excellent wine, as well as a quiet afternoon alone, reading and writing. He could talk to anyone and never made them feel that they were less than, even if he thought it. My father had a great social life with wonderful friends. He appreciated all of you. I need to give a special thank you to Martha Venegas, who helped me through the loss of my mother, but also introduced my family to Patty Roman. Patty made such a difference in my father's life, and hence made a difference in our lives. Thank you, Patty, for being so good to him and to us. I also want to acknowledge my brothers, their spouses, Kendra and Shirley, and my wonderful husband, Lloyd. We have chosen to deal with this loss and one another with the utmost compassion and respect. I'm not sure how I would have managed without all of you. I learned a lot from my father. However, I feel that there was still more to learn. I will miss him terribly. For the past 6 years, I have been saying a goodnight prayer for my mother. And now I will include my father in that prayer so that he knows he is never far from my thoughts.
I just want to say that I have Michael's novels at home, and that's all I'm saying about them. It was a 13th century Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi who once said, "When you are dead, seek for your resting place not in the earth but in the hearts of men." That's because he was 13th century. Today he would say men and women, I'm sure. But the sentiment is the same. We live in the hearts of those lives we touch. And if Michael were here today listening to the stories about him, friends, his children, how could he feel anything but pride and a profound sense of accomplishment of what his life meant and mattered to the people he loved the most? And who could ask for more than that? What tribute could be greater than that, than to have your kids, one after another, stand up and say what you have said about your father? So in Jewish tradition, the highest words of tribute are truly found in three simple words, and they are Zecher Tzadik Livracha. And how appropriate for Michael Gyepes, that the memory of this remarkable, extraordinary and yet dignified and humble man will continue in the lives of everyone he has touched and known as a blessing forever. And to that we say, Amen. Please rise as Cantor Frankel chants the traditional El Mole Rachamim prayer.
El Mole Rachamim Shochein Bamromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina Im Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Harakia Mazirim Et Nishmat Michael Ben Lazlo Shehalach Bal Rachamim Yastirehu Beseiter Kirafav Liolamim V'yitzera V'yitzera Rachayim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu נשמתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו
Source of life and death, eternal spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Michael Gyepes, who has entered eternity. God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be thou his possession, and may his repose be peace. As once again we say, Amen. Please be seated.
I'd like to thank Rabbi Stephen Carr Rubin and Cantor Chaim Frankel for officiating, as this concludes the sanctuary portion of Michael's service. In a few moments, the casket bearers will be called forth, who will be escorting Michael to his final place of rest. The interment site is located approximately 150 yards to the right of the exit of the sanctuary. The casket bearers will be leading the procession as we will walk to the graveside. The brown prayer books will be referenced to for the closing of today's service, so I ask that Michael's family bring those brown prayer books with you as we exit the sanctuary. Upon the conclusion of the service at the gravesite, the family will be having a gathering and has extended an invitation to all of you here today to be taking place at the Doubletree by Hilton. Although it is very close by, we do have directions available, and those can be found on the marble lectern or also at the gravesite. At this time, I'd like to call forth all of those who have the great honor of being a casket bearer. As I call forward these following names, I ask that they please rise and walk to either side of Michael's casket. David Gyepes, Stephen Gyepes, Tom Gyepes, Daniel Gyepes, Lloyd Gilbert, Chris Giamona, and acting as an honorary casket bearer today, as I call forth this name, I ask that they to please rise and walk up to the casket as well. Jacob Gyepes. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all rise in honor of Michael, and let us all follow behind his casket as we exit.